After looking at Game of Thrones Season 6 more closely for different videos, the more I realize how many devoid of logic aspects there are in the season. For this video, we'll go through Season 6 chronologically and analyze the most stupid aspects in each episode. So right away in the beginning, David and Dan created a contrived scenario for Davos and friends to get a hold of Jon Snow's body. Because it doesn't make sense why Sir Alliser Thorne killed Jon, left his body, and then got mad when Davos took his corpse into a room and barricaded it. If it's causing you this much of a problem, then why didn't you just burn Jon's body on the spot? Then there's the whole issue of the logistics of Sir Alliser's silly mutiny attempt, because he kind of forgot that the entirety of the Free Folk are right outside Castle Black and are loyal to Jon, so they will immediately lose their control, which very predictably happened. If they wanted to be much smarter about it, only have one person kill Jon without implicating everyone who's against him, so that when they inevitably lose control to the Free Folk, they won't have an easy time weeding out all the traitors. And there's one small thing that you shouldn't really do, which is admitting to killing the Lord Commander to everyone.
I did. Bowen Marsh, and Othel Yarwick, and the other officers in this castle.
That has to be the dumbest thing you could possibly do, and it's the exact opposite of what makes Game of Thrones so intriguing. The mystery of finding out who kills someone is infinitely more engaging than openly admitting to it, and it's also smarter. But whatever, Sir Alliser and all of his friends who clearly look scared to die have a death wish. Moving over to Theon and Sansa's totally epic escape, who couldn't be bothered with hypothermia, end up getting saved by a convenient Brienne wandering around in the woods. You'd think that during her crusade to kill Stannis, in which she both has to find him in the entire battlefield and then confront him, wouldn't have enough time to then go and find Sansa in the whole forest. Because she escaped when that battle was ongoing, and it seems that Brienne finds Stannis towards the end of that battle. Therefore, how would Brienne have enough time to find Sansa, or even have the ability to track her without hounds? The only thing that would make sense would be that Brienne heard the hounds in the forest, but we don't see anything from her perspective, so her entrance feels luck-based, and is a deus ex machina to save Sansa and Theon. Then we have the complete shitstorm, which is Ellaria Stan's power grab in Dorne. Why is it that now suddenly, Doran Martell has no support from his own soldiers or Kingsguard when a week prior they gladly arrested Ellaria Stan for committing treason? The Sand Snakes even gave the guards a golden opportunity to flip sides, but they seem completely dedicated to Doran. If anything, that would be the best time to do the power grab because there's an additional target of interest in Dorne who's also captured, which was Jaime Lannister. They'd be able to kill both him and Doran, along with Myrcella, and would be in a much better position. But hey, he has plot armor, we'll just let them go and do the power grab when he's a very safe distance away. And another thing is that Prince Tristan was on the boat with Myrcella and Jaime, and apparently the Sand Snakes were on that boat too. Although at the end of Season 5, they were clearly on the docks when the boat left. The Sand Snakes are so forgettable that even David and Dan forgot where they were in the story, so they conveniently teleported to King's Landing to kill Tristan. But if we're going to jump through all of those ridiculous hoops of them teleporting, then why didn't the Sand Snakes also kill Jaime Lannister? They waited until he conveniently left the boat to then kill Prince Tristan. It's not like Jaime Lannister is at all a threat to them given that he has one hand and can barely kill anyone, so it would be really easy for the Sand Snakes to deal with him. But yeah, this was just a very painful way to set up Dorne to be ready for Daenerys' alliance. Which doesn't even come to the end of the season, so I don't know why David and Dan rushed this development so badly. Now we have some classic comedy between Tyrion and Varys in which cock jokes make a triumphant return.
Because you have no cock.
All the more sign that David and Dan should not be writing comedy. But besides the wasted dialogue, nothing really happens here besides the totally pivotal moment of Tyrion wanting to eat
babies.
But at the end of the scene, they find out that the Sons of the Harpy had burned down Daenerys' fleet, which on multiple levels is extremely stupid. For starters, why aren't there any Second Son soldiers or Unsullied guarding the fleet? Because that is single-handedly one of the most important assets that they own, and they directly need the ships to get to Westeros. But apparently they aren't valuable enough to guard? You can make the argument that the Unsullied and Second Sons are busy trying to find the Sons of the Harpy members in Meereen, but that alone would be terrible troop management if there isn't at least a decent amount of people guarding the fleet. Then on the second level of stupidity, how were the Sons of the Harpy able to burn down the entire fleet without anyone noticing during the process? The bells start ringing about 20 seconds before Tyrion and Varys look at it, and by that time, every ship is on fire. There's no way that not a single guard noticed any smoke coming from the bay. This really shows the Unsullied in Second Sons as being extremely inept, and the Sons of the Harpy being very coordinated and strong when it should be the other way around. Yet again though, this scene is another contrived scenario where Daenerys loses her fleet so that she would gladly accept the alliance of Yara and Theon Greyjoy offering their ships. This is just a quick moment that doesn't make much sense later on, but when Daenerys is with the Dothraki horde and is walking with them, one of the Dothraki starts to sexually harass her. And he looks pretty familiar since he's one of Daenerys' main blood riders in seasons 7 and 8. So the fact that Daenerys doesn't hold any form of grudge towards him is kind of surprising given her past run-ins with people openly harassing her. Moving along though, during Daenerys' confrontation with the new Khal, they reveal that they don't even know who she is. This immediately contradicts the ending of season 5, where they actively sought her out and ambushed her with like 1,000 Dothraki. Do they just do this whenever they see some random helpless girl out in the middle of nowhere? Because it came across as them recognizing her distinct physical features from afar and actively seeking her out. But nope, Daenerys was just unlucky, and the entire Dothraki is so horny that they haven't seen a female in weeks given the amount of resources they spent trying to capture her. Arya has one quick scene where she gets steamrolled by the wave, and it's really silly that no one tries to help this poor blind girl getting beaten to death in public. Like, there are people just casually watching this happen as if it's a common occurrence. The general population doesn't have any form of empathy, I guess. Episode 2, Home. I didn't say this at the beginning of the video, but I'll be skipping scenes that don't have glaring logical issues, and although I have a big problem with Bran's development and what he's been doing, I'll touch on that during the Hodor revelation. In King's Landing, we have what feels like a deleted scene that takes place in Flea Bottom, where a man is talking about how Cersei saw his dick, and she supposedly licked her lips. As a result of this dreadful slander, the Mountain comes out of the shadows like Batman and turns his head into mashed potatoes. There are two things here that immediately confuse me. First, why is the Mountain wandering around King's Landing listening to commoners when he should be guarding Cersei? Like, if Cersei wants to be silencing people in the streets discreetly, you can hire literally anyone else, or use other guards besides the most inconspicuous giant in the Kingsguard. This work should be way beneath the Mountain. Then for the next aspect, if you're silencing people who are talking shit about you, then this guy isn't really saying anything that damning given that no one believes his story and he's coming across as a buffoon who's drunk. Then we have the showdown between Jaime Lannister and the High Sparrow, and I actually really like this scene. However, there's one integral line that has been rendered idiotic thanks to season 7.
Every one of us is poor and powerless, and yet together we can overthrow an empire.
The High Sparrow has planted that seed of information and that together as a collective, they can topple any dictatorship since they have the sheer numbers. But that whole notion gets completely erased, and this badass line ends up being weightless in the moment. You can argue that everyone is afraid of Cersei after the Great Sept explosion, but that isn't even the case given that everyone seems to love Cersei in season 7 and 8. And now we get our episodic dose of terrible comedy with Tyrion making fun of Varys for literally no reason.
If I lost my cock, I'd drink all the time.
It comes across as exceedingly unprofessional when everyone is here to discuss problematic issues in Meereen, but Tyrion is over here acting like a third grader trying to make adults laugh. The comedy in Game of Thrones takes a remarkable downturn post-season 5, and the witty jabs at opposing characters are basically a distant dream in comparison to the childish humor that Tyrion sadly finds funny. And that's just the start of the scene, because the topics discussed here are laughably brainless. Varys starts by stating that the fleet has been burned down, to which Grey Worm replies that no one was guarding the fleet since there was no witnesses. And wow, I was being generous with assuming that the Sons of the Harpy were being very surgical with their attack of possibly taking out guards, but the fact that there was not a single person at the bay guarding anything is mind-boggling. You're telling me that the Sons of the Harpy could have stolen the fleet instead of burning it and no one would have noticed? The Unsullied go from being incompetent to both incompetent and downright mindless apes that lost all their brain cells once Daenerys left. Instead of demanding change for the Unsullied for making this unforgivable mistake, Tyrion immediately changes the conversation to asking for good news. Is this what the small council meetings are now? Let's not address the problems at hand because they make me feel sad. Then Tyrion sporadically changes the conversation again to wanting to unchain the dragons. This is not a big issue given the massive problems they have to deal with, but whatever, we're talking about dragons now because dragons are cool and city issues are boring. Oh, what's that? The slavers have retaken Asapor and Yunkai, a pressing issue that demands our immediate attention? No. The dragons haven't eaten for a few days, so that's our top priority. Also, Tyrion's plan is to unleash the dragons from their chains, but that doesn't solve anything because they're still locked away in a dungeon. This problem of the dragons not eating originated from Daenerys leaving, so a random stranger taking off their chains shouldn't alleviate that issue. And Tyrion is pretty crazy for assuming that some hungry and angry dragons won't lash out at him. To the dragons, he's a complete stranger, and he goes down there alone with no other friends like Missandei to introduce him to the dragons so that they identify him as an ally. But David and Dan just excuse that nonsense for the dragons being really smart. Although they still aren't grown up, and are known to lash out at friendly people, let alone some random small dude who looks like a chew toy. Just forget about all those devoid logic aspects, viewer, because Tyrion drinks and he knows things, so he's a smart boy. Looking at another smart boy, we have Ramsay. And what was once a smart and cunning character kind of just evolves into a crazy lunatic because he wants to storm the Sacred Night's Watch just to kill Jon. It's wild that the Karstarks, Manderleys, and the Umbers are fine with that, even though Ramsay doesn't end up doing it. But the main person that opposed this batshit crazy idea was Roose Bolton, so I don't know why Ramsay randomly drops this plan when the person opposing it dies. Moving over to Brienne, she starts the scene talking about how she had a run-in with Arya in season 4.
You don't know which way she went?
I spent 3 days looking for her.
So, again, Brienne isn't in any form a tracker, and it reinforces the notion of finding Sansa in the woods being dumb luck. And speaking of luck, it's pretty lucky that Ramsay didn't send more hunters after Sansa after the first party failed. They even seem to be so confident to be making a fire at their campsite, so they aren't exactly trying to hide from them. But hey, a drastically high value target isn't worth more than one attempt to try and capture. Like, hell, they even went through a complicated plan to kidnap Bran by sending Locket to infiltrate the Night's Watch to try and find intel on Bran and to capture him. But sending a second hunting party after one of the most important people in the North isn't worth their resources? For the last scene of the episode, which is Jon's resurrection, there's not a lot wrong with the scene, but there's one small inconsistency in which Melisandre says she doesn't know how to do the resurrection, and then turns around and does this whole fancied ritual, indicating that she does know what to do. But let's move on to episode 3, Oathbreaker. This may be something that I'm confused by, but I thought that when someone gets resurrected, their past injuries immediately turn into scars. If Jon wakes up with the same wounds, then wouldn't he instantly start bleeding to death? Like, there are massive gaping holes in his chest, and if he's alive, then there needs to be blood flow, but for some reason he's perfectly fine. Also, why is this intimate scene of Jon coming back from the dead being spent with Davos of all people? A character that Jon doesn't even know and met very briefly in season 5. If anything, he'd probably be confused as to why he's there and would want one of his brothers like Ed to be with him to calm him down. So it comes across as David and Dan wanting to hamfist Davos into a higher position of power next to Jon, so he's more relevant to the story. Then Jon walks outside and not even Tormund is safe from the abhorrent comedy that David and Dan write.
I saw your pecker. What kind of god would have a pecker that small?
Out of all the things to say about current events, he has to say that he has a small cock. Magnificent writing. And ironically, the last person who's all the way in the back of the crowd, who arguably has one of the closer relationships with Jon, which is Ed, interacts with him last. Like, he seemed genuinely heartbroken with Jon Snow's death, and he couldn't even be bothered to be there with him when he gets resurrected? He's casually just chilling behind all the extras? Really? I get that Ed isn't a massively influential character later on in the show and shouldn't have a ton of screen time, but logically, it doesn't make sense for him to be so absent here. Also, during his brief dialogue exchange with Jon, he reintroduces the fact that people change when they're resurrected by asking him this.
Is that still you in there?
I think so.
The fact that this doesn't lead to anything and Jon Snow stays the same character is a complete and utter miss for Jon's character development. Like, this was a great opportunity to explore more worn down Jon or introduce new character traits that pertain to his resurrection. But nah. David and Dan just wanted to use this resurrection as plot armor to keep Jon Snow in the story and to have a cliffhanger finale for season 5. On the stormy seas, we have a scene between Sam and Gilly. Sam surprises Gilly with the information that they aren't actually going to Old Town and are instead going to Hornhill. On a decision basis, if you're in a relationship, you should probably consult your significant other before making a big decision, along with the fact that Sam is flat out lying to Gilly. They should be having this conversation before the boat ride, so that if Gilly is extremely upset by Sam leaving her, she could voice this concern to him before getting on the boat to Hornhill. But Sam doesn't care about what Gilly thinks and would feel? Because as it stands, it seems like Gilly would just be an inconvenience for him in Old Town, since all he would have to do is work out living arrangements for them. And that shouldn't be that big of a problem, and it isn't that big of a problem in Season 7. So by Sam wanting to ditch Gilly, that should definitely upset her, and there would be a much larger argument here. But David and Dan write it so that Gilly just doesn't care, and since there's a lack of conflict, the scene ends early. Because of that, their relationship feels so superficial, and after this point, I could really care less about them. Also, why is Sam even bothering with the idea of bringing a wildling to his home? Both his father hates his guts, and there's no way he'll want to house a wildling in his home due to how conservative he is. And how does Sam intend on explaining this whole situation if he's in the Night's Watch and isn't supposed to be with anyone? He'd immediately come off as forsaking his oath in front of his family and would be a complete embarrassment. So the fact that Sam even thinks this is a good idea and would rather deal with that shitstorm instead of taking care of Gilly himself is mental. Looking into the past, we have a flashy action scene. And to be honest, I'll let this one slide because of how cool it was initially, but it does fall into the action conundrum of facing multiple people at once and one person attacking at a time. Like if the men were down to break honor and stab Sir Arthur Dayne in the back, then why didn't they do so earlier and not let all their friends die? Whatever, let's move on to another riveting Tyrion comedy extravaganza. For this scene, it feels like it's a deleted scene and it only exists to make the episode past the 50-minute mark. Despite 2 minutes of dialogue, it's kind of baffling that David and Dan couldn't muster a single line that offered some form of character development. The only thing we learned is that Missandei and Grey Worm don't drink, and that's it. Tyrion is still acting like a child and wants to play games with two very serious people, and for some reason, Tyrion can't act more mature and talk to adults in a more witty manner. Maybe it would be nice to relate past trauma and hardships you guys have gone through together instead of blabbering on about alcohol.
We do not drink.
Until you do.
The pure contrast of Season 6 Tyrion to Season 2 and 3 Tyrion is crazy. It's like his mind is developing backwards like Benjamin Button. Then we have a small council meeting where Maester Pycelle farts for comedic relief. And I think I need to highlight this moment. This is Game of Thrones, one of the most serious and dark shows that have shocked audiences, and we are now devolving to the lowest form of comedy of farting? Seriously? We are down this bad to succumb to this, David and Dan? These are Emmy Award-winning writers, and this is what they are writing into these episodes. Besides the egregious fart, not much really happens here, and all the adults themselves are acting childish too by refusing to work with each other. There's only a couple of other small aspects wrong with the episode, like the Umbers randomly giving up Rickon Stark for free, but I don't feel like that needs much elaboration. At this pace though, I'll probably be doing 3 Devoid Logic videos on Season 6. I know I only did one on Season 7, but back then I basically just cherry-picked the most stupid aspects instead of doing a more thorough chronological analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and also, thank you guys for getting the channel to 300,000 subscribers. That's crazy.